Moses is in the position here of being a shepherd and being called by God as a shepherd. What is there anything to be made of that? The fact that we talked a little bit before about Moses learning some things from being a shepherd, but from maybe a more specific standpoint, what do we know from the Bible about shepherds and the calling of shepherds? And shepherds are used a lot in the Bible. Is there any kind of pattern that we can discern to understand what shepherds are from a biblical perspective?
Well, they care for the flock and ultimately bear the weight of that responsibility. And it's not a small thing. It's a light and heavy responsibility, but also joyful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You've also got, obviously, Jesus is the good shepherd.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, Moses, in some sense, and Joseph in other ways, was a type of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And things of sort, but you've got that analogy made, and obviously David, same thing. He was a shepherd before he was king.
Mm-hmm.
You see this time and again, but also, God refers to the leaders in Israel many times as horrible shepherds and things of that sort too, and things of that sort.
So the shepherd is a really interesting picture, and it's you have to understand it theologically, otherwise it doesn't quite make sense because we don't think theologically much anymore. But if we were to encounter a shepherd, we go outside, we go out to the middle of the pasture, the middle of the wilderness, and we come upon our shepherd. What's he doing? He's out there. He's minding the flock. He's protecting the flock. He's keeping bad things away from the flock. He's leading the flock. He's caring for the flock. He's mending the wounds of the flock, leading them to green pasture, to water, leading them away from danger. He's doing all these things, but there's other things that he's doing with the sheep, right? He's kind of, there's a sense in which he's the head. He's the head of the sheep hierarchy, and yet he's not the same as the sheep hierarchy, right? So we talked about how on your dollar bill you have this pyramid, and the very top of the pyramid is something different than the rest of the pyramid, right? That's actually a pretty fundamental idea in Scripture, or not just in Scripture, in the ancient world, but it's also in Scripture. Now, I'm not saying that particular symbol is, but just the idea. And this idea is kind of a fascinating one because what does a shepherd eat?
His flock.
What does a shepherd wear?
Them. Yeah.
His flock, right? So you have something really interesting going on where the shepherd's not the sheep, but then he kind of is the sheep. There's a union between him and the sheep.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Right? Because he eats the sheep, and so they get incorporated into him, but he's also, in a sense, incorporated in them because he wears wool, right? He uses them as clothing. So this picture is a really powerful picture of what real leadership looks like. And the thing that's fascinating about that is that it's a much different picture than Pharaoh in Egypt. It's a picture of Christ, right? Christ says that he is the good shepherd. Well, yeah, of course he is, right? So does Christ eat the flock? He does.
Wait, are we talking about communion here? I mean,
Well,
when we commune with one
Revelation,
another.
Yeah, talking about Revelation, right? So he says, if you're neither hot nor cold, I'm going to spit you out of...
Yeah.
Well, okay, so why
Why are we in there?
Yeah, why are we in there? Because he's
Indeed.
eating us. Because
Yeah.
what does his body consist of?
Yeah.
It consists of the flock. And the thing is that, we are in him and he is in us. There's that union, but yet he's also separate and distinct from us. And that's the picture of real, true leadership that takes place, is that now, from the standpoint of Moses, does that mean that he's completely separate from the flock? He's different than the flock, that he's above the flock? Is he like Pharaoh, where he's the son a god, and so he's different from all those underlings that he has.
No.
No. Okay. So then how should Moses understand this?
When we say this, like what's the this that Moses needs to understand?
The leadership, how the top of the hierarchy is different than the hierarchy, but the same as the hierarchy.
You're talking about being the go-between the flock, the Israelites, and God, that he represents one towards the other in
Right.
both directions.
Who's the real leader?
Obviously God.
God.
Yeah.
See, and that's the difference between the hierarchy of Egypt and the hierarchy
Right.
that Israel's going to have,
Right.
is that the real leader is God. Remember, God is not too keen on providing a king for Israel, and what's his reasoning behind that?
'Cause he's their king.
Because he's their king, right? I'm your king. You don't need another king. You don't need a human king. And if you do have a human king, what's going to happen to you?
Be oppressed.
You're going to be oppressed. That's the way it's going to happen, right? Because the real thing is understanding that when you're the leader of the hierarchy, you're actually not the leader of the hierarchy.
Right.
Because and we actually embody that here in the United States in our Constitution. There's nobody that's above the law. The law is actually the Constitution. There's something spiritual, because it's not the piece of paper, right? It's the meaning of the Constitution. That's actually over everybody, including the president. And if the president starts to see him as the leader, then he's completely lost the plot, and he needs to be humbled and brought down, and he will be, because he's not understanding the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is that what's at the top of the hierarchy is not the same as everything else. It's something spiritual, and yet it feeds off of, it is embodied by the flock. And so there's this spiritual relationship that goes on there. And anytime you're a leader of anything, if you forget this, then you're not going to be an effective leader or a good leader. Because what happens is, all the time, and it doesn't matter whether you're a librarian or whether you're a CEO, it doesn't matter. There are principles above you that if you stop following them, you're on the path of destruction. To the extent that as a leader you embody the values that give life to the organization, then you're a good leader. To the extent that you are leading, it's about you. It's about what you feel like doing at the moment. It's about what's convenient for you. It's about what's easy for you. Then you're not the leader. And the thing is, you kill your you kill your authority. You kill your the respect that people have for you.
Saul and David.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of the country of Lebanon right now. I mean, their leadership, pretty much took actions that were in their own interest, not in the interest of the country. And now they don't really have much of a country to govern either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what happens, is because if you're not embodying the values, the thing that we have to understand is that any group of people is always held together by something spiritual. They identify as a group. That's not physical, that's spiritual. And you can say, well, this family is something physical. Well, the genetics are physical, but the fact that they stay together and does every family do that? No. So it's not something physical. It's not physically just the state of the situation. It's spiritual. They're seeing themselves as a family. They're saying to themselves, what does this physical bond between us mean? It means, and then they're embodying certain things. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
that's not the same thing as the physical bond. It's an interpretation. It's giving meaning to that physical bond, and that's what any group is. And if you as the leader stop embodying that spiritual ideal of what the group is, then the decisions that are being made aren't based on that, and pretty soon the group falls apart because the group is no longer based on that. It's no longer embodying that. You've destroyed it, because the decisions that you've made have not reflected the thing that's holding it together, and so pretty soon nothing's holding it together. Because basically this people of God is going to have to be formed around something. They're going to have to be patterned after something. And just like we talked about, God has a specific nature, a character, a pattern to who he is as being, and that's the foundation for everything. Then that the people of God have to be patterned after that in order to exist, and in order to be able to be in his presence, and in order to experience the blessings that God has for them. If they don't, then it all falls apart. And if Moses isn't making decisions based on this, how do the people come to resemble it? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's really no hope. God works through leaders, and that's why God prepares leaders. Jesus was on this earth for 33 years, and yet his ministry was only 3 years. And he was the Son of God, you know? And the funny thing is that I don't know about you guys, but I experience this all the time where I make a mistake or something doesn't go right, and I get very frustrated with it because I want things to go a certain way. My initial reaction is frustration. My initial reaction is not, okay, what do I learn from this?
Right.
One of these days, I hope that's my initial reaction is, what do I learn from this? And yet, not always, not ever. Any thoughts on Moses and his situation?
I think in light of what you just said as well, is, sometimes we want the wisdom that comes with age and suffering. We just want it without the age and the suffering.
Well, and that's part of the thing here, is that there aren't any shortcuts. There really just aren't any shortcuts. And the reason for that is because it's not head knowledge. It's embodiment. It's not about the things that you can recite or write down on a piece of paper. It's what you actually do. And we all know that that's a much different and a much harder thing. How many of us know we're supposed to be patient, right? And yet knowing we're supposed to be patient is not even close to the same thing as being patient. And think about this from just, all of us have a family here. You go home and you're supposed to be patient, but let's say you're not patient. For whatever reason, you go home at night, you're not patient. And then you get up in the morning and you think, man, I really need to be more patient. I should have been patient. I knew while I was being impatient that I should have been being patient, but I wasn't. And then you think to yourself, well, it doesn't really matter, because in my mind, I knew I should be patient.
Because that's
so,
what your family is.
The head knowledge is just as important as
Sure.
what I act out.
My wife says, well, as long as you know, Ken,
Yes.
that's all that matters.
Right. But you understand what I'm saying, right? Like, which one of those is more important? Is it the thing that you knew in your head, or the thing that you actually act out?
Of course.
Because what actually formed your family that night?
Right.
Was it the thing that you knew in your head, or was it the thing that you actually embodied? This is the problem that we all experience as Christians. And so when God has us going through these difficulties and these trials and these hardships, it's really important to understand that there isn't any other way. God could give you the information, but giving you the information and having you actually embody the values, the character, the nature, having to actually embody him and who he is, that's a completely different thing. And you can't do that without going through the experiences that you're going to go through in your life. It's just not going to happen.